Schwartz's smirk was as unwelcome to me at that moment as an uncle and drag at a christening. Schwartz ambled over to the driver's side of the squad car and greeted the officer. Apparently he knew every cop on the force by name, since he said, "It's okay, Larry, she's with me." "That's what she tells me," Larry said. "Do you want me to call for a tow?" Schwartz shook his head. "That won't be necessary. I thought this might happen, so I brought a chain. I'll pull her out."
The Infidel is proud to present to you a special report on a new book titled Atheism for Dummies, and we have been lucky enough to interview Dale McGowan, its author. Professor McGowan has an impressive resume. He's an author of secular parenting books and novels, a blogger, a speaker, and a college professor. He has a degree in physical anthropology, another in music theory, as well as a PhD in music composition and theory. He's currently the executive director at the Foundation Beyond Belief, an illustrious secular humanist charitable organization. His brand new book, Atheism for Dummies, hit the shelves recently. The For Dummies collection by Wiley is famous for their easy-to-understand tutoring for beginners. It covers a vast number of topics, from plumbing to programming, and from voice acting to using your iPhone. Written in a clever and humorous tone, Atheism for Dummies delivers a solid 380 pages of information about atheism, from defining terms to giving a history lesson to helping with living a deity-free life. This book is comprehensive. In a world where atheists are so mistrusted and misunderstood, such a book is bound to help the atheism movement to gain acceptance, or even its number of supporters. Welcome, Professor. It's a pleasure to have you on The Infidel. Writing a book about atheism is a great idea, but why did you choose the For Dummies label?
Actually, I didn't choose the label, they chose me. The publisher in Toronto, actually, went looking for an author when they decided that the cultural moment had arrived to have a book called Atheism for Dummies. And they first contacted Hemant Mehta, who's the blogger at The Friendly Atheist, and asked him for recommendations for someone to write it. And he said that I would be a good person to do it, and I'm very grateful to him for doing that. But I think it's also the right time for a book like this. It's time to have a resource for people who are frankly curious about atheism, to have a resource that's not necessarily trying to change their minds or convince them of anything, that just presents and describes atheism in a fairly light and entertaining way, but still substantial.
In which section of the bookstore would your book appear? It can't be religion, right?
Yeah, well, part of the problem that we run into frequently, God Delusion and other books as well, is that there isn't really a category that captures what we do, what we're talking about. If it's in philosophy, that's a very different audience. The people who are interested in a book called Atheism for Dummies are frequently going to be people who are in the religion section, and they're looking for another worldview. They're looking for, in some cases, something entirely else, and they run across this book. So they actually do place it under religion and spirituality, I think, is what the publisher has done, simply because there really isn't another place that is ideal for finding the audience that's going to want to read this.
Who's your target audience exactly?
The target audience is, and they were very clear about this from the publisher's perspective, they want it to be a lay audience, an audience that is not necessarily atheists themselves. They may be, but primarily people who are not familiar with atheism. They're not extremely well informed about the worldview. And the fact is that has also included quite a number of atheists. I've had a lot of people tell me that they have been atheists for many years, but they don't really know the history of it. They don't know a lot of the sort of foundations on which they're standing. So it's been really gratifying to have written it for a lay audience, but at the same time, an awful lot of atheists have said, hey, I've been an atheist for most of my adult life, and I didn't know an awful lot of this stuff. So there's a bit of a split audience there.
Why are new atheists sometimes called angry atheists?
Uh, the so-called new atheists in the past 10 or 12 years, really after the attacks of September 11th, that was I think a big catalyst in the movement. Have been very forthright. They've been very direct in their challenges of religious ideas. The way Richard Dawkins put it is the gloves came off on September 11th, 2001. We had, as a community, had often been below the radar, sort of unwilling to engage in a forceful way. And so once it is actually done in a way that's very direct, it can only be interpreted by many people as angry, that it's just all emotion. It's just something that's devoid of useful content. And that's unfortunate, but it's the sort of reaction you get from someone who just simply isn't used to having their beliefs challenged in a direct way. So I think it's a natural consequence, but at the same time, it's one that when people actually sit down and read the books of the Four Horsemen, as they're called, the new atheist major writers, they're frequently stunned. You read something like The God Delusion, and you expect it to be screaming at you all the time, and it's actually a fairly moderate tone and a very reasonable one that once in a while makes some very direct points.
Why is the French-speaking Canadian province of Quebec an interesting corner of the disbelieving world?
Yeah, this is a point that I make at one place in the book. Quebec is. I first became aware of how interesting Quebec is in this area when I was interviewed by the magazine L'Actualité, I think is the name, and I probably mangled that pronunciation, but several years ago, and learned that Quebec was settled as New France. It was settled by the French and initially restricted to Catholic settlers. And so Frenchness and Catholicism have been joined as a part of the same identity for all those centuries. And with the English-speaking Protestants all around, Quebec has naturally embraced Catholicism as a part of its French identity in a way to distinguish itself from the rest of the Canadian mainstream. So for most of Canadian history, Quebec has actually been the most religious province in Canada. But in the last generation or two, there's been a tremendous shift, and it has actually become the least religious province in Canada, but it still includes 83% Catholics. And what's interesting here, and probably not surprising to a Canadian audience, but very much so to a US audience, is that people are retaining their Catholic identity and at the same time saying, I don't believe in God. This is actually a sort of a cultural Catholicism. And that's a fascinating thing and unique in my experience to have that kind of a shift from predominantly religious Catholicism to predominantly what amounts to secular Catholicism, cultural Catholicism, and that makes it one of the most interesting places in the world for disbelief right now.
You describe deconversion as giving you freedom and relief. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, this is in a section of the book I'm talking about the surprise that many people feel when they go through a deconversion, for want of a better word, that losing their religion, losing their religious faith. Many people are told for years that if you lose your religious faith, you will lose all hope. You'll lose all joy in life. The world will suddenly seem very gray and unpleasant. And there's this surprise that many people say when they lose their religion, that instead of feeling all those things that they've been promised they would feel, they feel this sort of sense of relief and freedom and the ability to explore the world without the constraints of especially the more orthodox forms of religion. So it's this wonderful thing that I've heard so many times now, scores of times from people, that feeling was such a surprise, the feeling of freedom and relief, of setting the religion aside, putting it behind them, because it was just the opposite of what they had been told to expect.
Thank you once again. Atheism for Dummies is currently available. It's a great read and a fine gift idea. You can purchase the book by following the link in the video description.
Thank you. I appreciate that.